Hey there guys, and welcome back to another video. In today's lesson, I am going to tackle one of the most common problems that I find my students have in every single lesson so that you can understand it and avoid these mistakes in the future. There is also a free copy of this lesson that you can download. Just check the description of the video and you'll be able to get your hands on that straight away. Now, without any further ado, let's get into the lesson. As you can see, today we're going to be tackling the subject of articles, a and the. Articles are particularly challenging in English because of all the exceptions and the different rules that we need to use. And today I'm going to cover the basic general concept of how we use articles in English, and then I'll follow up with some specific technical things in some other videos to show you those specific exceptions. So this video is going to be really focused on understanding how we use them in a very general way to avoid the most common mistakes. The reason that they are so challenging is because a lot of languages, for example, like Russian, don't have articles. So understanding the concept of articles when your native language doesn't have them is actually really difficult. Also, there are lots of other languages which do have articles, for example, like Italian or German. But the way articles are used is very different. And now we need to really understand the logic that we use in English to make sure that you are approaching it and you're using it in the correct way. When we talk about articles then, we're talking about a, an, and the. These three words we attach before a noun. This is both for countable and uncountable, and we use them to demonstrate some type of understanding between the speaker and the listener. And this is really the key difference that I want you to focus on and really try and understand in this video, because I find in lots of the lessons I have with students, they tell me that at school they're told a completely different idea, and that makes it very confusing. Generally, the idea is if we use the word the, it means that the speaker and the listener both understand the specific or the designated thing or group that we are talking about. So when I say the government, as an example, then the listener will understand which government I'm talking about based on the context. In this case, you would imagine the British government because I live in England. A and an are used in a way that will show either one thing, where the thing in particular is not important, you are just saying one object or one item, or where you're introducing something new to the listener, which means they don't already know what you're talking about, or they don't have enough information to identify it clearly. And if this sounds all very complicated, don't worry. It is complicated, but with practice it starts to become much more natural. To reassure you, in the Cambridge Grammar book, which I use all the time with my students, there are about 150 different units on all the intermediate level grammar. And 10 of those units, so almost 10% of the whole book, is just for the word the. So one word takes up 10% of all of the intermediate grammar in the famous Cambridge book. So if you feel like it's really difficult to understand all the exceptions and how to use the in a really nice way to sound natural, it is very difficult. It's not you, it's English in this case. Looking at the indefinite article. And just as a side note, when I'm doing these grammar lessons, I'm going to use the grammatical terms because I think it's important that you have access or reference to them, so if you want to search for something later, you know the term that you can look for online or in your grammar book. But really, it's important to remember it doesn't matter if you remember all the grammatical terms, if you don't remember the names of the tenses that you're using. It's much more important to understand the logic and actually know how to use them. If you're talking to somebody or you're having a lesson with a teacher and you don't remember the technical term, being able to give an example or explain what you mean is actually way more important. So don't feel like I'm making you memorize these terms by doing the grammar lessons, okay? Perfect. As I mentioned before then, we use a and an when we are introducing a single item, a single thing, or when we are introducing a new idea to the listener. Something that they haven't heard before, something new which they don't know which thing we are talking about. It's really important to remember that we only use a and an with countable nouns. Uncountable nouns don't have a singular form, so we don't need to use the indefinite article. If we want to use the same concept for uncountable nouns like money or information, you don't need an article, you just use the uncountable noun on its own. For example, let's have a look at these sentences I prepared for you. Do you have a car? In this case, I want to know if you own one car, not a specific car. I don't have a car in mind. I just want to know if one car belongs to you. In the same way, if I wanted to use an uncountable noun, I could say, for example, do you have money? In this case, I'm not thinking of a specific pile of money or some designated group or collection of money. I'm just talking about the concept of cash in your pocket, okay? I went to a restaurant yesterday. This is one of the most common examples that I would hear, especially for Latin language speakers, for example, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese. They would say, I went to the restaurant. We can only say the restaurant if the person you're speaking to knows which restaurant you mean, or there is only one restaurant, because then they will automatically understand you. Because I'm telling a story, I know the restaurant, but you don't yet. After I introduce the restaurant, then I can use the to refer to it because you know what I'm talking about. So it's really important to think about, am I giving them enough information to know which thing I'm talking about, or is it brand new? And finally, I have a twin brother, meaning one. I have one twin brother, which I actually do. Also, to remember, when we say an, it's used when the noun starts with a vowel sound. And this is really, really important. It's not about the spelling. Remember, in English, you can never trust the spelling. It's always about the sound that we pronounce. So for example, you would say a hotel, but you would say an hour, even though they are both written with a H at the beginning of the word, because hotel, we pronounce the H, it's a hotel. And because with hour, we don't pronounce the H and it's an ow sound, it's an hour. So be really careful of the pronunciation, and that will help you identify whether you need a or an. Now talking about the definite article, which is the, and we use this in a very general way when we both understand the same thing. Either I've introduced the thing to you before, you understand it from the context that we are talking about, or I give you additional information so that it's clear exactly what I'm describing. Usually we do this with a relative clause. For example, the bank that I visit every week, as an example. In this case, the can be used for both countable and uncountable nouns. The really big thing I want to remind you here is often teachers and lots of resources will use the term specific when they talk about the. I don't think this is a very good definition on its own. As you can see, I have used it, but it's really important to remember that it's specific and understood, because when we talk about something specific, if I say I went to a restaurant yesterday, like the previous example, it is a specific restaurant because I went there. I know which restaurant it is, but you don't. And that's really the key idea. So even if it is specific and designated, I'm thinking of one particular thing or one particular group, it's really important that you know what I'm talking about. And this is where it gets very complicated in English, because it's about assuming or guessing what the other person understands based on the conversation. And the has so many exceptions, there will be lots of cases where you think it sounds natural and it doesn't. But like I say, if it's something that interests you, put a comment below the video and I'll prepare some special videos about all of the different exceptions we have for the word the. Let's have a look at these examples then. Can you turn on the light? In this case, if I'm talking about this room, if I say the light, there's one light here, so you know I mean the light in this room. And that means that the context, the physical space, gives us the idea that we know which light we are describing. How did the meeting go earlier? That means that maybe we talked about the meeting, or we both already knew about the meeting, and now you're just saying, oh, the meeting we discussed before, the meeting we both knew about, how did that go? And finally, he's on his way to see the doctor. This is one of the special ways we use it, where it is a normal place or person that you visit. So often the supermarket, the doctor, the dentist, you normally mean your doctor, your supermarket, your dentist. Even if there are multiple doctors and multiple supermarkets, usually we just say the. If you say I went to visit a doctor, it would normally mean a specialist or someone who is not your normal doctor. In the same way, if I say I cleaned the car, you imagine I mean my car. That would be the most common idea. And when we are talking about uncountable nouns, be very careful not to use the word the when you are speaking generally. This is something I often hear where people say, the people like this. When you say the people, you're talking about a specific or designated group of people, not just people in general. So if I say, for example, British people like tea, I just mean generally people who live in Britain. If I say the people in this city, now I'm talking about a specific group of people who live in a particular place. In the same way as I mentioned, when I say the government, I'm talking about a specific government. So it's really important when we use uncountable nouns, it can become a very common problem that we start using the, because in languages that do have articles, that happens all the time. So be very, very careful. If you're speaking generally with uncountable nouns, just use nothing, okay? Just the word on its own. And although this isn't really an article, it kind of goes in the same family, and I think it's kind of always important to remember. The word some is something we use just to talk about plurals or multiple things or groups of things. And in the same way, if I say I have a book, if I want to talk about having more than one book, I would say some books is a very common way we do this. The reason this word is also particularly useful is because you can also use it with uncountable nouns. So you can say, I have some information, I need some feedback, I heard some news. All of these would work perfectly well. Very important to remember that some with countable nouns is always followed by a plural. And this is really important because in lots of languages, some is followed by singular, and especially for Italian speakers and Spanish speakers, it can be very, very confusing, okay? So remember, some and plural if it's countable, uncountable never changes, so some and the uncountable is absolutely fine. Let's take a look at some of these examples I've prepared for you then. I have some money in the bank now. In this case, it just means an amount of money. It sounds very common to talk about this when you're using an uncountable noun like this, rather than just saying I have money, sounding like the general concept of currency. I have some money is a really natural way of helping the conversation flow. Get some friends together and we can play football. In this case, more than one friend. I have some pizza. Do you want some? Again, I have some pizza, in this case maybe slices of pizza, and I'm saying, do you want some pizza, an amount of the pizza, which I have. To help really solidify this idea and help it to make sense to you, I've prepared a series of examples using a and the, so we can compare the differences together and really understand them. And this is really, really important. So as we're going through these, try and understand the logic that we're using, the reasoning, why we're doing it. And that should really help when you're using it in conversation yourself. The first one, Tim sat down on a chair versus Tim sat down on the chair nearest the door. In this example, it's clear that in the second sentence, we've given additional information. Let's imagine that you hear these sentences and you walk into the room. With the first sentence, you wouldn't be able to identify which chair he sat in because there's no information. If there's 5 chairs in the room, you wouldn't be able to tell me which chair he sat on, so you know it's one of those chairs. If I say the chair nearest the door, you can identify the exact chair he sat on. And that's really the key idea here, is that when I add that additional information nearest the door, so I'm giving you some locational information, that means you can identify the exact one rather than just one chair of maybe a selection of chairs. I'm looking for a job versus I got the job I told you about last week. In this idea, the first sentence, I'm looking for a job because I want one job. And the job isn't necessarily important in this case. I'm just trying to tell you that I want one job to do. The second example, I got the job. The reason I do this is because if it's something I told you about last week, you know which job I'm describing. So the first time I introduce this idea, I would say a new job. I have an interview for a job next week. And then when I speak to you afterwards, when I say the job, it's saying, oh, you know the one I mean, the one we talked about last week. Do you have a car versus I cleaned the car yesterday? As I mentioned before, do you have a car? You want to know if they have one car. Most of us, unless you're some billionaire who has 10 different Ferraris and Lamborghinis, most of us probably only have one car, possibly two. In this case, when you say, do you have a car? It's just saying, is there one car in your possession? It's just a general question. We're not imagining one specific car. You don't know which car I have. It's not understood. If I say I cleaned the car, it's basically the same as saying I cleaned my car. And because I only have one car, because it's unique, it's always understood. And that's one of the extra ideas that's good to remember is if something is unique, if there's only one, we normally use the word the because it's automatically understood. The same if I say the Eiffel Tower, everyone imagines Paris because it's the only one, it's the famous one. The same as the Colosseum in Rome, things like that. So if there's something very, very famous or there's something very unique where everyone automatically understands what you're talking about, the is very common in that case. He's a doctor in that hospital versus I need to go and see the doctor. The first example, you're talking about his profession and you are saying he is one of the many doctors which work in that particular hospital. So one of many. The second example, when you say see the doctor, you mean your doctor, not one of many doctors. And this is really the key difference here. So if you say he is a doctor, one of a selection. I had an apple for lunch versus the apple was delicious. This is very common in conversation. Imagine I say these directly together. I had an apple for lunch. It's something new. I'm telling you what I had for lunch. There's no way you could know that I had an apple. But after I introduce the apple, then I can say the apple, because now you know what I'm talking about. In the same way, another good example would be, I went to a restaurant yesterday. The food was amazing. In this case, I haven't said the word food, but because I said restaurant, you know the food is from the restaurant I've just told you about. So remembering, it doesn't matter if you say the specific word exactly, if you give enough information that the context or the exact thing we are describing is understood. And this is where it's a little bit more vague. So remembering, if you introduce enough information the other person understands, then you can use the word the, even if you haven't said the specific word like food previously. Is there a bank near here? Versus, I have to go to the bank today. When we say, is there a bank near here? I need one bank. I need one bank because I have something I need to do. I'm just asking, can you tell me about one bank that I can use? In the second example, I have to go to the bank. It normally means my usual bank. Also, if there was a very small town where there's only one bank, this would also work in the same way. But usually when you say go to the bank, you normally mean your bank because you need to speak to them about your account. That would be the most logical idea. Now, I know these examples, there's lots of different ideas here, lots of things going on, and I really recommend that you have a look at these examples and you try and write your own example sentences, thinking about phrases that you can actually use yourself. So take an example of all of these and then try and adjust them and change them so they're a phrase that you could actually use yourself. If you're not sure or you want to ask me for some advice, write those sentences and then put them in the comments below and I can take a look and give you some help along the way, okay? Perfect. Now, I'm going to give you a story. We're going to imagine a scenario, okay? So let's pretend that we're actors, okay? So stick them up.
All right, everybody, hands up, heads down.
The idea here is I am a robber. I'm the guy in the picture. And you work in a bank. And I'm coming here to rob the bank. Okay, imagine that scenario. The scenario is very important. When I walk in, I come up to you, I have my gun drawn, and I say, put the money in a bag. Or I say, put the money in the bag. Now, before I explain it, just take a second, even if you want to pause the video and just have a think. What do you imagine, based on all the information that we've talked about previously, is the difference between saying a bag and the bag in this particular context? So take a second, have a think, maybe make some notes, and then I will explain it for you. The first one then, put the money in a bag. We're talking about one bag in general. The idea here is the specific bag is not important, and I'm not giving you any ideas of which bag I want. Imagine that I have 10 bags, and I just want you to get money and put it in one of my 10 bags. In this case, a bag would apply because one of many. Also, if I don't have a bag, I'm basically telling you that you need to find one bag and put money inside, but I don't care what it is. So maybe you have a rucksack or you have a handbag and you empty it and you put money in there. That basically would work for me because I'm not giving you any specific instructions. I just want the money. The second example is more specific, and in this way I would either show you which bag. So maybe I hold a bag and I say, this one, I point to it. Maybe you have a bag and I point to your bag. And again, by pointing, I'm giving you physical indications of which bag I'm describing so you understand. And both of these examples then, the bag is important. The specific bag where I want the money is important. So if you started getting your handbag and putting money in there, I'd say, oh, no. I want it in this big black one. And that is really the key difference here, is both of them are possible, but both of them are slightly different in terms of the context and what I'm trying to get you to do. And this is really important, that when it comes to articles, there isn't a single rule. There isn't a single thing which this one is always correct and this one is always wrong for general nouns. Actually, both of them can often work, but it generally means something slightly different. But my question, why in both of these examples do I always say the money?
Put the money in the bag!
So if we go back just for a second, put the money in a bag, put the money in the bag. So bag we changed, but the money remained the same the whole time. But why is that? Can you think of something? Do you have any ideas? Let's go back to the context. If we remember, it's all about understanding which money we're talking about. So if you work in a bank and I come to rob you, am I trying to get you to give me your money from your pocket? I don't think so. That would be a bit strange. If a robber comes in and says, hey, give me the money, and you get your wallet out and you start, taking out a couple of notes, they'd probably look really confused. Because if we're in a bank, I'm clearly here for the money in the bank. And again, this is where I don't say the phrase money before, but because of where we are, you understand. And I know I keep mentioning this, but it's really, really important because it's not something that's actually said. Often people get very confused, and my students tell me this all the time, that it's really confusing when it's not something that you've actually said before, but you need the article, you need the, because we kind of understand from some additional information or where we're standing, something like that. It's much more situational and it's not always a uniform rule. So getting this idea of context can really, really help you to identify whether the is useful or it's not. And that's the end of my initial introduction to and the articles in English. As I mentioned before, there are lots of exceptions and special cases, and if that's something that interests you, put a comment below the video and then I will prepare some special lessons for each of those exceptions so you have a full, complete resource that you can use to never make a mistake with articles again. Also remember that this lesson is available to download if you want to keep it for reference and use it when you're writing your example phrases and practicing your English. Just check the description below the video and then you'll be able to get your hands on that straight away. Before we go, we're going to always say the mantra to stay positive and really help to push ourselves towards fluency. And the mantra is, I can become fluent, I will become fluent, and I must become fluent. Positive mindset, okay? I hope that this lesson has really helped to clarify and give you some ideas of how you can use articles correctly and to avoid making those common mistakes that we hear in conversation all the time. If you're watching on YouTube, have a fantastic day, have a great day learning English, and if you're on Twitch, let's keep going.